Good Morning Liberty.
Well, what is up, all of our liberty-loving friends? This is another fantastic episode of Good Morning Liberty. My name is Nate Thurston. Across from me is no one, just an empty chair where every once in a while, Charlie Thompson is over there. He just hasn't been there all that often lately. He stayed a couple extra days on his weekend trip so he could either win or lose more money at the casino. I don't know. I haven't gotten a report from him on that yet. And so he's not here today. Thank you guys so much for being with me. I'm going to try to keep my thoughts more organized than I did yesterday. It was sort of all over the place. I'm just, if it's your first time listening, this show is not built for me to just sit here and talk to people. Somehow I manage to do that every now and then, but I'm not the kind of person who can just sit here and like monologue or go over a lesson plan without reading something through the entire time. Yesterday, I made a bunch of notes and like typed out things to say, and then I just never looked at it at all. So it's not my thing. So if it's your first time here, go back and listen to an episode where both of us are here going back and forth talking about these issues. That would be awesome. Tell a friend, tell your family member, tell the children that they should listen to Good Morning Liberty every single day of the week when they want to. Join the Fed Haters Club. Join GML.com. Join GML.com, the Fed Haters Club, so you can hang out in a private Discord group with us during the show. All right. So we're going to talk about this mortgage thing. By now, you guys have heard plenty of people talk about this, and so I'm going to try not to bore you with the exact same stuff that you've heard. We're going to talk about this 50-year mortgage idea that Trump has thrown out there, and why obviously it's probably a pretty bad idea. Okay, we get that. At the same time, I recognize why he is talking about this. We do have an issue with people being able to buy houses, especially first-time home buyers, especially younger people being able to buy houses. They call it a housing affordability crisis. I don't know if we're in like crisis mode right now, but yeah, housing affordability has gotten pretty rough lately. And so people are trying to find a way to solve it. And I'll give you sort of my beginning thesis on what I hope to talk about here, which is going to be the supply side of housing, which is the obvious problem here. And I just recognize so many of the things we talk about when it comes to the government trying to do things, Republicans or Democrats, so much of what we get as far as plans go from them are really just different ways of trying to ignore supply and demand. It's like this entire game of them managing the economy or attempting to manage the economy are just different people trying to find different ways to get around supply and demand or to try and act like it doesn't exist. And the government makes all this even harder because typically what they do is they will stimulate demand, more demand for products, either by just giving people money. That's one way they can stimulate demand for products. And then at the same time, it turns around and it restricts the supply of whatever those products are through rules, regulations, taxes, what have you, all sorts of things. So it's pretty wild. Even when they try to stimulate the supply, they often do that by like throwing taxpayer money at the problem of supply, which decreases productivity in the rest of the economy because in order for them to get that money to throw at that problem, they either have to take it out of the productive side of the economy, they have to print it, which causes inflation, or they have to borrow it, which is a promise to print or borrow in the future and raises interest rates as well and makes things more expensive in doing so in that supply. So even when they try to stimulate the supply, they tend to get that thing wrong as well. But the actual solutions to the problem, the overall solution, the answer to the problem is a pretty simple answer. Now, getting that through, especially when it comes to something like housing, that's a little bit more difficult because a lot of the housing problem is not even at a federal level. Like the bulk of it, honestly, is at a state and local level. And so we'll talk about that a little bit. But the answer is more supply, and it's pretty wild. Like, the people don't want to accept it, but supply and demand is like this law of nature that we can't ignore any more than we can ignore gravity. And all we've seen throughout history are different governments, our own government, trying to find ways to ignore supply and demand. We didn't really do economics when I was in high school, as far as a class goes, and I didn't take any economics when I was in college. But the little bit of economics we did cover, and I think I had a class that was just called government or something. That's like the worst name for a class I've ever heard in my life. Even the little bit of economics that we did do started, like, the first thing we learned about economics was supply and demand. And I think there is a reason that is literally the first thing that you learn when it comes to economics, because it's not just a principle like the Constitution or individual liberty or whatever that we try to hold to. It's like it is a natural law for whatever reason. For whatever reason, it's just a natural law that we must hold to, and we must consider at all times, in the same way that someone trying to build a rocket and send it into orbit has to consider gravity. There are no other options around it. And so this brings us to the part of the conversation that you guys have seen by now, I'm sure. There's a Truth Social post that went out from President Trump. Honestly, there's an even more offensive part of this. It says, great American presidents, 30-year mortgage, President Roosevelt, FDR, and now 50-year mortgage, President Trump. So the main idea that people are talking about from this, of course, is the idea of doing a 50-year mortgage. And that's what has gotten all the attention. Honestly, the worst part about this post is something that says great American presidents and then FDR being below it. That's that until we fix the problem of Americans thinking that FDR is a great American president, I don't know if we can actually solve any of our problems. People should be so disgusted with the things that FDR did while he was the president that they would never do any of them ever again. But we're not at that point yet. He still gets to be posted as a great American president every now and then. Good for him. Then there's the 50-year mortgage thing. Oh yeah, the 50-year mortgage thing, a thing we're going to talk about a lot. We clearly have a housing problem. Like I said earlier, I'm not sure it's like a crisis yet, but housing is expensive. Myself right now, I have a house, I lucked out, and I picked a great wife who talked me into getting a house in 2016. And thank God she did that, because since that time, the house that we bought has at minimum doubled in price. And we don't live in the best area in town. But since then, the house has doubled in price. I would not want to go pay that amount for the house that I live in right now. I would not want to pay that much money to live in the area of town that I live in right now. And right now, I feel like I'm sort of stuck in the house. First off, it's insanely cheap. It's way cheaper than renting, if I even were going to rent anywhere. The house next door to me got bought by a rental company. They rent out that house for $1,500 more a month than my mortgage payment. Not $1,500. They rent out the house next to me for $1,500 more than my mortgage payment. That's how expensive just that area has gotten. I cannot imagine paying that much for the house. It's like, not that it's because we couldn't do it. I just haven't wrapped my head around new prices on things. I got a car from before COVID. I got a house from before COVID. I don't have any kids. And so, like, our grocery bills have gone up a bit. And like, that's how things have changed. And so I get it, kind of. It's very expensive out there, for sure. Mortgage rates are way higher. Another reason we're locked in the house we're in right now, even though we have a lot of equity in it, more equity in it than what we paid for the house. The mortgage rates are so much higher now than what they were. Like, we're somewhere between 2.5% and 3% on our house. And now that's around 6% somewhere, I guess, depending on what your credit is. I keep saying sometimes it's 6.25. Some people getting 6. I don't know what exactly the mortgage rate is right now. So just to get the house that we're in right now, we'd have to like double our payments. It's ridiculous. And so many people who are out there trying to buy a house for the first time or whatever, having a tough time. That increased mortgage rate, by the way, itself restricts the supply of housing, because here I am in this house that I would like to leave. It's a great first-time home buyer house, really, but I'm not going to leave it because I don't want to go to a second-time home buyer house that's going to end up costing me like 3 times as much as this one. So I stay in this one, and so that supply is restricted. A lot of these first-time home buyers, they got their house, COVID happened, inflation happened, money printing happened, the mortgage rates went through the roof, and now you don't want to leave. That's happening quite a bit at the moment. Before I forget to say it, when it comes to Trump's thing with the 50-year mortgage, sure, right now, like your private lenders, I think I saw someone in the group say that Fannie and Freddie could do more than 30. I don't know. I don't know for sure on that, but I trust the person who said it. So I guess Fannie and Freddie, they can maybe do 40. Is that okay? Campers. Okay. Gotcha. So yeah, 50-year mortgage. That's a lot for sure. But we should leave this up to the market. Right now, private lender, believe, can't just go give someone anything more than a 30-year loan. I think that was the most recently in Dodd-Frank that they reiterated that 30-year loan. Didn't do a whole lot of digging into that. Should they be able to do more? Well, sure. They're the ones that are out there loaning the money. They have to decide what that risk is. Like, you're going to get this asset. You're going to front money for it. What amount of money do you need to make over time, over 50 years, considering all the life circumstances that could happen to that person, considering inflation over that 50-year time span? Like, what do you need to make off of that? And then they'll decide what the interest rate needs to be on a 50-year loan and what someone's credit rating needs to be, stuff like that. And they can decide. I've seen a lot of comparisons going around online that compare the 6% $400,000 house for 30 years versus a 6% $400,000 house for 50 years. And those are probably inaccurate comparisons. It's way more likely the interest rate would be a lot higher on that. That's the case between 15 and 30. It's likely to be the case between 30 and 50. So that's... yeah, thanks, Spale. Over 50 years, how many more pandemics, massive inflation shocks, wars, stuff like that, the final destruction of U.S. currency. Also, there's a lot of stuff you got to plan for in that 50-year time horizon that they have to price into that loan. So my personal belief is, and don't worry, we're going to talk about some numbers and stuff, and you guys have seen a lot of numbers going around and all that, but we'll talk a little bit about them. My personal belief is it should be left up to the market. The market's going to show people how they would have to price that risk. And then, like, no one's going to get the 50-year mortgage because I don't think it would even be any cheaper monthly. In fact, I think there's a 50 years pricing in that. There's actually the potential for it to be more expensive over that time. So this is... all right, let me get to this video. This video is going around. We'll play it. It's 1 minute long. This is Trump talking about the mortgage terms.
Housing costs are still out of reach. And another thing that your administration is trying to tackle, many Americans, the average age of first-time home buyers are now up to age 40, which is sad for the country you and I grew up in.
But I inherited that. Look, you have to understand.
Right, but let me get to the question, though, because your housing director has proposed something that has enraged your MAGA friends, which is this 50-year mortgage idea. So a significant MAGA backlash, calling it a giveaway to the banks and simply prolonging the time it would take for Americans to own a home outright. Is that really a good idea?
It's not even a big deal. I mean, you know, you go from 40 to 50 years, and what it means is 50, you pay something less from 30. That some people had a 40, and then now they have a 50. All it means is you pay less per month. You pay it over a longer period of time. It's not like a big factor. It might help a little bit. But the problem was that Biden did this. He increased the interest rates. And I have a lousy Fed person who's going to be gone in a few months.
All right, there's that clip. So he says not even a big deal, could lower the rates and all that. And once again, I think we should let the market figure it out. I don't personally think it's going to be much cheaper, if cheaper at all. And let's go through some of these. Now, you guys have seen, this is just from one real estate company here. This one's basically showing you the difference in payment going from, on a $400,000 house, being $2,460 down to $2,180. So there's a little difference, close to $300 in difference, $280 difference. But they're assuming, I think they're assuming the same rate. Let me see here. They might be bumping up the rate there a little bit. And that's a difference of paying $487,000 in interest over the 30-year mortgage versus paying $908,000 in interest over the 50-year time horizon. Now that's, it's fine. It starts to feel more like you're actually renting with like a right to sell that. Like you got the right to sell it, and you're probably going to accrue some value, over that time. Even if you're not paying down principal, the house is going to go up in value over that time. And so it's not exactly like renting, of course, because you can never sell that place that you're renting from someone else, but it's essentially going to feel like that. Although the amount of people who actually pay off their house fully and live in that house, like it's tough enough to find people who pay off their car and just drive that car for an extended amount of time. It's probably pretty tough to find people who actually pay off an entire house. Magoo says it's 2%. So what people are typically going to do is they're going to get a house and they're going to live in it for 8 to 10 years, especially like a first-time house, 8 to 10, something like that. And they're going to look for a new house after that. Maybe you get in that nicer house, your forever house, or you're close to your forever house, and you're going to live there for like 15, 20 years, and you're going to look for something else after that. It's very, assuming Magoo's 2% number is right, which I trust that he looked up these stats. That's, most people are paying for their house every month. So that's not like the massive change here. And that's not even my biggest issue that I have with this. You can still sell the house, all right? You can still go get another house if you want to do that. My bigger issue is that I don't think this is actually going to save anyone money. In fact, I think this is going to cause more inflation in the housing market if you don't address the actual root cause of the problem. Remember, I started by talking about how we've got a supply and demand issue here, and what we're always trying to do, or what the government is always trying to do, is try to find ways around the natural law of supply and demand. And all you're doing with this idea, not that there aren't other ideas that are out there, not that this is the only thing that they are trying to do to help with housing affordability, but all they're doing right here is quite literally stimulating demand for the houses. So that's where I come down on this. Let's see. I've got all these charts, and I think I'm going to skip over some of them. Equity build up over time. As you guys know, you're going to pay a lot of interest in that thing. And this same real estate company says that this is likely to cause housing inflation because they're increasing the number of people who can afford the mortgage without increasing the number of homes available. And that's where the biggest issue is right now. I want to get to some of the myths and culprits about what's going on here with the housing crisis. Why are things so expensive? Why is there housing shortages? And then we're going to get to some of the actual solutions to the problem. The first one really is the banks. That's what people get. There's a few pages that pop up in my timeline every now and then, and they're people who typically tend to be more right-wing coded on things. That they'll post these videos of someone showing how much of their payments are going towards their principal balance and how much of their payment is going towards interest. And they'll talk about how this interest is a scam, and that's the problem with housing, and that's why things are so expensive. So I want to address that just a little bit, because people do tend to blame people like the banks who are just giving you money that you don't have to buy this thing that you can't afford to buy, and then allowing you to pay them back over a long period of time. And so we'll talk about that. This typical 30-year mortgage, 2289 is what I come up with here. This is around 6% interest. You end up paying a total of $824,000 for a $400,000 house. I then took that with the same interest rate, and I did that for the 50-year time span, and it took that down from 2289 down to 2054, which is roughly similar to what we saw earlier. I think the interest rate that's in this calculation is a little bit different. 2054. So in this case, you're looking at saving like $230 a month, but you're looking at paying a total of $1.2 million for your $400,000 house over time. Okay, we get that. And then you start to look at, well, what happens if you actually increase the interest rate? Because that's likely to be the case. Okay, what happens if you actually increase the interest rate a little bit? If you increase it by half a basis point, which is not half a basis point, you guys know what I'm, half a point, it's $21.78 for that house, and you end up paying $1.3 million for it. So now you're looking more at saving $100 a month on the house. I don't even think that's likely what we're going to look at. Like, you were going to pay 6 and now you're going to pay 6.5. I think it's more likely you're going to pay something closer to 7 if the rate's at 6 at that time. And that sends your monthly payment to $22.73, which is a total of $16 cheaper per month than the 30-year mortgage. And you're going to end up paying $1.36 million for your $400,000 house. So that's not much cheaper, and that's just assuming that the interest rate's going to go from 6 to 7. And I think that's highly likely for the interest rate to go from 6 to 7. The banks have to calculate some risk when they're deciding they're going to let you borrow money from them for a term of 50 years. They're going to calculate some risk in that thing. There's one thing I found super interesting, by the way, and this could just be one of those things that works out this way, or this is just the way that the interest rates are partially calculated, so it makes a little bit of sense. I just thought this was really interesting. So they give you that right now, they give you that $400,000, paying back over 30 years, and you end up paying them $824,000. So their $400,000 investment, they end up getting back $824,000 from it off of that interest rate. I thought it's very interesting that over the last 30 years, I wanted to look at the inflation rate. So $400,000 30 years ago, today, would be $864,000. It's very, very similar to what you end up paying a bank back when they give you a 30-year loan, meaning that they're essentially getting the same money back with a little bit more over what the inflation has been over that time. Now, it's not exactly the same because they're getting some of that principal balance back over time. They're able to then take that and use that in other places. So it's not the same thing as they gave you $400,000 and then 30 years later you gave them a check for $824,000. Not exactly the same thing, but I just found that to be really interesting. So when you do that over a 50-year time span, it ends up being, as you would assume, way up in the millions, around 1.3, 1.4 million, that they would need to get back 50 years later for it to be the same value as what they paid for that house. Okay, those are things they have to consider when they're trying to figure out what the risk is of giving you that money over a 50-year time span, which we know is unlikely for people to actually keep the house for that long. So I'm not going to do the same thing as you're going to be a debt slave for your whole life, or this just makes you a renter, or you're never going to get to own your home, all that stuff, because as we discussed, it's highly unlikely people are going to pay off their house and live in it for the rest of their lives, and they're going to get the house they want, they're going to pay it off, and then they're going to live out the rest of their life in this house that they paid off. That hardly ever happens. Literally hardly ever happens. Would it be better if that happened? Sure, but as life circumstances change over time, we decide we want bigger and better things, or we want to move somewhere else, something like that. It hardly ever happens. I want to look at some of the current situation that we're in, though. The Wall Street Journal had this cool article out yesterday or the day before, and had a bunch of charts and graphs in it. And I like charts and graphs. Housing affordability index is down quite a lot from where it was back in 2010. It's a big move down. Home price to income ratio is back up where it was right before the housing crisis. Actually, it's been up above that during the COVID time, and now it's kind of evened out to right at the peak of the housing crisis. These are not good signs, but it might mean that houses are about to get cheaper soon. We'll see. Might not be great for all the banks and all the people who currently have their homes, but whatever. Then they had this cool graph in here, share of home listings that buyers can afford, and it separates it out by income level. So like in 2019, someone making $75K could afford 50% of the houses that were on the market. Okay, if you're making $100K, you could afford a little over 60% of the houses that were on the market. And of course, as that number goes up, your income level goes up, you can afford a bigger percentage of the houses that are on the market. Right now, if you're making $75K, it's more like you can afford 20% of the homes that are on the market. Okay, and then the $100K, you can afford something like 35% of the homes that are on the market. So they've become less affordable. You guys get the picture here. Sorry, let me go to the group here now. Yeah, so afford. What does it mean to be able to afford the house? It's a good question. Most of them will take this calculation saying, are the mortgage payments going to be more than 25% of your monthly income? Something like that. 25, 30%, something like that. It's getting closer to being like 40%, 45%, things like that. But I think what they use as affordability is the mortgage payment being 25% of your monthly income. That's what they're talking about. So when they say affordable, and when they do these ratios here, like home price to income ratio, what they're taking is the median home price to the median household income. Now, that would mean if you're making the median household income, it's gotten really expensive for you to get a home that is the median home price. Doesn't mean that you can't buy a home, smaller home, less cool home, whatever, or in a cheaper area that is below the median price for a home. So like it's not impossible for people to get housing right now. Then there's this other culprit. So when people talk about the interest rates with the banks, and what frustrates me a lot with that is that they just don't understand how amortization schedules work. Like we want a fixed payment over that 30 years. In the first year, you owe them the total balance of the house. And so you're getting charged interest on top of that. But you don't want your first year's home payment to be like $15K a month or whatever. And so that's spread out over time. You end up paying bigger interest payments at the beginning because you owe them way more money at that time. They've let you borrow the $400,000. Here's the interest rate on the $400,000. It ends up being you pay way more interest up front. And then the next year, after you paid some of that principal off, here's what interest is on top of that. And because we want this to be spread out evenly and give us one payment over that entire 30-year or 50-year time span, they end up having to front load a bunch of the interest to spread this out. I'm not an expert on how amortizing loan schedules go. I know it's a pretty complicated business to be in, but that's why. And it's not even out of the ordinary. We're not the only country that does this. In fact, a lot of countries do this because that's like math and accounting and banking. That's just how it works in the financial world. It's not like some evil thing that American capitalist banks made up so they could fleece the American people. So that's important. In fact, that if you're watching the video, it'd be good if you're watching the video actually, and you can see this little graph up here at the top. So watch the video on YouTube. I recommend it. This little thing up here at the top, all these bars up here, it's showing you starting off how much of what you're paying is principal, how much of it is interest, and you see over time, much more of it is principal and much less of it is interest. But yeah, And the first several years, a whole bunch of that stuff is interest. I've had my house now for 9th year in my house. And yeah, we've paid down, let me see if I can give you some quick math on this thing. I guess we paid down like 20% of the principal balance of the house over that time. Something like that. Although if you were to calculate the amount of money we've paid in over that 8 or 9 years, it's way more than that. This is just how it works. Then as I made some comments online, I got some responses from people talking about the big evil rental companies. And that's been a lot of talk recently. And people always point out BlackRock, who itself gets confused with the company Blackstone, which is a different company, not BlackRock. Blackstone is a company that owns a lot of rental places. If you guys feel more comfortable, I'll say BlackRock for you, because that seems to be what everyone says when they're talking about this. But it's Blackstone would be the major thing that you're worried about when it comes to this. So I want to look at, are they really causing the big issue with the housing supply in the U.S.? Remember, once again, back to the beginning of this episode, the issue is the housing supply. The supply is not meeting the demand. Once the supply meets the demand, prices can equalize, they can go down. But as long as there is way more of a demand than there is a supply, the prices will continue to go up. People keep trying to find a way around this, but that there is no way around that. There just isn't. I don't care what part of the economy we're talking about. Demand is outpacing the supply, so the supply needs to meet the demand. So this AEI Housing Center, and I think this is the American Enterprise Institute, is my assumption on that. So they talk about how a lot of legislators around the country, a lot of state legislators have been pointing out these big rental companies, these big investment companies coming in and buying up all the housing stock and turning them into rentals instead of these single-family housing units that people can come in and buy. They turn them into single-family rentals. And that's been the big issue, and that's why it's gotten so expensive to buy up the houses. And I'm sympathetic to that argument. I've seen a lot of people talk about it, and the amount of people I've seen talk about it, it seems to have some truth behind it. And in fact, it probably is true in certain areas. I'm going to go through some of the data on it, just so we don't. The problem is supply, okay? But I don't want people to get fixed on things that are not actually the root cause of the problem. Because then, when we focus on that, we don't actually solve the problem. And then it just keeps getting worse and worse, and then it spirals out of control, and then people just end up wanting some kind of commie socialist nonsense to fix their problems, and then it gets way worse after that. And so if we're actually going to try and solve the problems, we got to try and identify what the problems are before we try and solve things that aren't actually the problem. A lot of people talk about these investment banks coming in, buying up all the houses. Okay. In my neighborhood, there's 300 houses in my neighborhood. My HOA covers 300 houses. And when we moved in, there were about 25 houses in that neighborhood that were rentals. And now it's something closer to, I think, 110 of the houses in my neighborhood are rentals. That's a big increase. Once again, there are probably certain neighborhoods and certain areas around the country where this is more of a problem than it is in the entire country. They say these legislative efforts suggest a widespread consensus that institutional investors are a major culprit behind the nation's housing affordability crisis. However, this narrative is not supported by empirical evidence, as the market share of institutional investors is less than 1% nationally, with 22 counties, which is 0.7% of counties, having a percentage as high as 5 to 10%. So 0.7% of the counties have a percentage as high as 5 to 10% of the homes being owned by these institutional investors. The rest of the average, or the total housing supply in the country, the number is less than 1% as a country. They say, further, their emergence was not a cause but rather a reaction. That's the emergence of the institutional investors coming in and buying up these properties for rentals. They say it was not a cause, but rather a reaction to government regulatory failures. These failures include restrictions on home building that have resulted in a multi-million housing shortage, as well as the Federal Reserve's easy money inflationary policies, particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic that incentivized investors to ramp up home purchases. They say the solution is not to ban institutional investors, but to allow more housing to be built. Yes, to increase the supply of the housing. That is accurate. There are different neighborhoods where this is going to be an issue. Like in my neighborhood, there's a cat walking around on the table right now. Get out of here. Get out of here, cat. Get out. All right, there's a cat on the table. Sorry. I'm going to cut that out. Don't worry. No, I'm not. I'm going to forget to do it. I guess the cat can come over here. That's fine if the cat wants to talk about stuff. I'm basically relying on in my neighborhood. I don't really have to worry about what a person can afford to buy my house for. I just have to worry about what this company called Progress Rentals can buy my house for. What are they going to determine it's worth? And that's really all I have to worry about. So it's sort of an easy feeling for someone who's looking to sell their house. I'm like, do I have to get this major thing repaired where, the house still works, it's still functional? If it's a rental property, they're never going to care about repairing that thing. Maybe someone who's coming in with a 50-year mortgage would care about that kind of thing. But Progress Rental, are they going to care about that thing? No, probably not. So it's probably not going to be a knock on the price of my house at all, honestly. So we'll, different places, this causes issues. They got some good charts. I can show you this in many different ways. Investor home purchases market share over the last, it's the trailing 12-month number. Now, what you do see is that in Q4 2000, so for that year, 2000, it was about 15% of these houses. Sorry, I'm going to shove this cat off the table here pretty soon. About 15%. Now it's about 25%. Now what you see is kind of during the heyday of the housing boom and all that, it was around 20%. And now it's about 25%. And these little bars right here are shaded like people with 1,000 properties or 100 to 999 properties or 1 to 9 properties. And most of them are people who have 1 to 9 properties. Not your Blackstones, but your person who decided to buy one house and then a few years later they buy another house and they're just trying to make some money off of that. So not that big. 86.6%. Let's see. Investor-owned share of single-family housing stock in June 2025. Not investor-owned is 86.6%. So this is of the total housing stock. 10.8% single-family housing stock. 10.8% for people who have 2 to 9 units. And then hardly anyone for the people who have like 1,000 units or close to 1,000 units, stuff like that. It's just not as big of a problem as what people have made it out to be. And so I don't want people to just focus on that. This is a chart that shows counties around the U.S. where if it's blue, it's basically way less than 1% of the share of the houses are owned by these big investment banks. And what you see is most of the places around the United States, that is the case. And then when you get into bigger cities, it starts to be something more like 3-4%, something like that. This is the best graph overall for this problem. And the fact that it's not a problem is pretty funny, actually. So these are states that are trying to ban the institutional investors from coming in and buying up houses for rental properties. These are states that have legislation in the works where they're trying to ban this practice. And I thought this is the best one overall because on the left side, it shows you what the housing shortage is as a percentage of the total units. Like how much of a shortage do we have for housing? On the left, it shows what the investor-owned share of the total housing units is. So like California is at the top of this list. Okay, they have a housing shortage of almost 15% as a share of the total housing units that they have. Almost 15% light on the houses they need. And they're trying to ban institutional investors or try to slow down institutional investors from coming in and buying up houses because they think that's the problem. But the actual share of institutional investor-owned properties is less than 1%. Meaning that if you were to take that off of the shortage that they have, it would not even be recognizable. And that goes down the list for New York, Washington, Nevada, Utah, Florida, Arizona, New Jersey, all that. A bunch of states. Tennessee's got stuff in the works for this too. And you just find it if they were to stop people from doing that, it hardly moves the shortage whatsoever. So what's the bigger problem? The problem is the shortage. The problem is the supply. I know it's fun to say, well, the banks are screwing people on interest rates. No, they're not. Actually, that's the government that's causing the interest rates to be too high. And all of their money printing and borrowing that they're doing, the deficit spending, things like that, spending money they don't have. All right, that's who's screwing you over if you want to be mad about interest rates. Don't be mad about an amortization schedule. Like that's how it works out. I don't know what else to tell you on that one. The big institutional investors coming in, are you going to stop them from doing it? And that's going to be a big issue. And like, no, I just showed you the percentage shortage that you have would hardly even be affected if you were to take away all those houses that those people earn or own. That it would not be the big issue. The problem is how many houses are getting built. That's the big issue that we have right now. The problem is the supply. That's the problem. I've got new housing permits and new housing starts right here. And what you find is it's pretty high up there in 2004 and 2005. Of course, we have a little bit of a financial crisis, a little bit of a housing market crisis that happens. We have not gotten back up to the levels of the pre-2005, 2006 area when it comes to new housing starts. And we have a lot more people in the country. Don't worry, I'll mention immigrants. We've got a lot more people who are not the illegal immigrants that are in the country also. And we're still not starting as many new houses in the country as we were even just before the housing market crisis. Just not happening. Why? Because people don't want to do it. They don't feel like doing that anymore. You just can't make money off a house. Is that what the problem is? I don't think that's the big problem. If you look at the housing inventory change, you see, the U.S., as far as this goes, still down below that 2016 is what this is indexed to, and we're down since then. Texas is up a lot. Texas is. That's interesting. Why is Texas up so much more than the United States as a whole? And just for fun, they threw New York on top of that. What's going on there? Well, I actually find with Texas, new housing starts are up above where they were from that 2003, 2004, 2005 time period. So they're still starting new houses. They're doing something different over there in Texas. They're doing it bigger. So I went through, just this year, they've done a lot of stuff that kind of makes sense when you realize that the problem is the supply. There's plenty of demand for houses. What about the supply? These are just some of the laws that they've done so far this year. Okay. Apartments allowed on commercially zoned land. Okay. That's a pretty good one. Homes allowed on small lots. So they call it starter homes legislation, which allows homes to be built on smaller lots of at least 3,000 square feet. Should enable more middle-income households to become homeowners. Okay. Simplifying rezoning. This law reduces barriers to land use changes by strengthening property owners' rights to use their land to create housing by ensuring that the small minority of nearby landowners can't thwart new construction. At one, I both recognize and understand the NIMBY problem and argument. Not in my backyard, people, because I get it. I got a house, and I kind of like there's not a house right next to mine to the left of my house. There is one over to the right. I live in a cul-de-sac that they just never built it. I mean, the cul-de-sac's there, but they never built any houses around the thing. I'm the only house that's in the cul-de-sac. And then behind my house is just woods. There's just woods and then a lake. Now, there's plenty of space in those woods for them to build a whole lot more houses. I'll tell you what, I'd be kind of upset if they did. Once you get your little plot of land right there, and you don't have a neighbor right here, and you live in an empty cul-de-sac, and you got woods behind your house, and that's pretty nice, I'm like, I don't really want them to build any houses around there. I don't. Now, I would not go to the local meetings and try to ban people from being able to build houses and all that. But I understand if that happened, they'll be like, oh man, that sucks. Used to, I just have woods and nothing over here, an empty cul-de-sac, and now there's people everywhere. That sucks. I can't go do whatever in my backyard anymore. Every guy knows what true freedom is. It's being able to just listen. If you don't know, everyone wants to go outside and pee in their backyard. That's just the fact of the matter, okay? And I wouldn't be able to do it anymore. That's just what it is. So yeah, I think who said that in the group? I saw Michael Scarn said it. I don't know what it is, but you ought to be able to pee in your backyard in America. I think that should be a rule. They had this other thing, removing the two-stair. Oh, sorry, I forgot one here. Removing barriers to office to residential conversions. This law simplifies office to residential conversions by removing the need for rezoning and other regulatory obstacles, such as the need to add more parking on an already developed site. And I think that's a smart one, because what did we find after COVID was that a lot of people could work from home. I know some people went back to the office. A lot of people went back to the office, but there's still a lot of commercial properties that are sitting empty. The company my wife worked for, they just built a gigantic commercial building downtown, and then they sent everyone home during COVID, and they did not bring everyone back to the office. And so there's a lot of these buildings just aren't even getting used right now. And you have to be able to convert those over to residential if you can, if it's feasible in that property. But guess what? A lot of these local governments make that nearly impossible or extremely time consuming to do. Once again, typically we talk about things the federal government should do differently and what we disagree with the federal government doing. We spend a lot of time doing that. This is a little bit different because the majority of these problems come from state, and not just state, but your local governments, your county governments, or just your little municipality. Right? That's where many of these restrictions are happening. That's why it's actually harder to fix, say, on a national level. On the national level, they should do whatever they can to deregulate housing. If they've got say-so over permitting process, if you got to go get federal permits for certain things, there's going to be EPA restrictions, things like that they have to go through. And they should figure all that stuff out, streamline that, or get rid of all of it. And I know I've seen... back in the early days, back in the Doge days, when we were really talking about cutting government, they talked a lot about doing that. And guess what? That kind of stuff might take time to filter out into the economy. It might take time to actually see the effects of that happening. Even if they did do it, how long does it take for that to happen in the economy? It's going to take some time. But in this case, your local state government is what is truly important in the scenario, because most of these laws come from local and state government. And you know what's great about that? You've actually got more power in those governments, because you're a much larger percentage of the population than you are a percentage of the population for the federal government. You've actually got outsized power relative to the federal government when it comes to your town or your county or your state. And on top of that, what you'll find is that most people are not involved in their local governments, including me. I'm not really involved in my local government. It doesn't take a lot of people to make noise in order to get some movement on things in your local government. It just takes being willing to go to some kind of a meeting somewhere, go to something at the Capitol sometime, go to something at City Hall. These people are not used to seeing a lot of people, especially rational people, coming out and making arguments in one way or another. Most people are not involved in these governments. Wouldn't take a lot of you guys, I promise. So if your local government's doing something you disagree with, I'd recommend doing such a thing. Go out there and talk to them. Texas removed a two-stair mandate. If you live in Texas and you've seen, if you know what this means, it says it updates the state's standard building code language to remove the mandate for a redundant second stairway in a small apartment building. Research found that doing this would reduce construction costs by 6 to 13% on these buildings. That's an expensive second stairway. A redundant second stairway. I don't know what's going on there, but I'm glad they got rid of that stairway. I don't like it. Allowing use of manufactured housing. This measure expands areas where manufactured housing can be located. That's pretty good. Manufactured housing, prefabricated housing, things like that. I think those are all great things. Oh, and allowing home sharing. I don't know what this is. A so-called Golden Girls law prevents jurisdictions from restricting people from sharing homes based on whether they are related. It applies only to jurisdictions under 250,000 people with large colleges or universities, which should allow more efficient use of existing housing stock. Let's see here. Oh, yeah. It's like, why did they get involved in these things in the first place? A bunch of these things are common sense, man. And more states need to follow suit. Local governments need to follow suit on these things. Absolutely. The conversation was supposed to spend a lot of time on the 50-year mortgage, and you guys know where I stand with that. I wouldn't get one, but I think the free market will decide. Like right now, they can't offer it. Should they be able to? Yeah, sure. They should be able to. I think it would actually have some definite inflationary aspects to it, for sure. I mean, at its core, you're talking about more people being able to come into the housing market, right? You're not really talking about increasing the supply of the houses with this. You're just talking about here's a way we can bring more people into the housing market. So that, just on its face, that stimulates the demand. On top of that, even if you were to work it out with the interest rates where it were a couple $100 cheaper, it's likely everything would just adjust. In the same way that like we talk about minimum wage, like everything's just going to adjust. The prices are going to adjust to that. Like right now, the houses are priced in a way that $400,000 house was somewhere around $2,300 a month for 30 years. And they found that that's where they can do the highest volume, at least to sell the houses that they're able to build, that's where they can do the highest volume. And what they'll find is, okay, we got more volume coming in. We were already doing highest volume at this price. Probably just the price of the houses are going to go up, where now the 50-year mortgage would be the price that a 30-year mortgage used to be. And then my fear would be that the 50-year mortgage becomes more common, and you just see that it gets way more expensive to do a 30-year, and the prices all adjust to reflect that. But that's down the road, and I don't even know how serious this idea actually is. It will take a law to make it happen. And it's pretty tough to get laws these days. Pretty tough to get those. So I think that's likely to happen if they do get the law passed. But I don't even think they would. I got two other things. Quick ones, really quick. I did remember to refer back to my notes here. As I saw someone mention earlier in the group, we can't ignore immigration. Even like no matter how you feel on immigration, like you're fine with it, or you're super against it, or you just don't care, you can't deny the fact that somewhere between at least 10 million to maybe 20 million people came into the country in a span of like 3.5 years. Remember there in the last year of the Biden administration, they started to actually act like they cared about immigration. They actually started to try and stop some of it, the illegal immigration, border crossings. And so in a span of 3.5 years, we got somewhere between 10 and 20 million new people on top of the population growth that we had. And then that's like on top of other legal immigrants and things like that came in. There's sort of really, maybe not on paper, but really a population boom occurred during this time. It hasn't been like reflected in census data yet, but I would assume there was a massive population boom that occurred during that time. And I don't think a bunch of those people are all just out living on the streets. There could be some of them that are living on the streets, but what seems to have been the case is most of them found houses or apartments to live in, one way or another. I'm glad they're not out on the streets. I don't want human beings out on the streets. But when you increase your population by that much, and we didn't build that many houses, during that time. You got a massive influx of people. Seems like most of them are housed. Yes, it seems to be the case that they would take up housing, apartments, whatever, that would have otherwise been used for people that were already here. I don't think you can ignore that, can you? Even if you don't care about the immigration or whatever, the basic economics of it is big population boom. We did not have a correspondingly huge boom in the supply of houses. Supply and demand problem. Seems to be the case. And then I'll do the thing that no one wants to hear. So overall synopsis is we got to fix the supply. Everyone has to be focusing on fixing the supply. Most of that's going to come from reducing regulations, state, local, and whatever federal that can be done, okay? But that's what has to happen. Zoning laws, permitting laws, don't take 1 to 2 years to get permits. Don't zone things where you can't build houses on small enough lots, stuff like that, where they could actually be affordable, like putting the minimum size of a lot has to be, and so you're paying more for land there. And so all sorts of stuff like that could be done to help the housing supply. And people will build. People will build that housing supply. The other thing I want to remind everyone of, and you don't want to hear it, it's not valuable to the conversation right now, but I have to say it. The prices, you might remember us talking about this a few months ago. The prices have gone up, but they're not as bad as they look. Let me explain. A few months ago, I'm going to try and find the clip because that'll show me where all my slides were and everything from this, all the research that I did. We talked about how when you're paying for a house, one thing to look at, when you're in the grocery store, you're like, what's that cost per ounce? Comparing these things. It's a good way to know because sometimes something has more ounces. But you find it's cheaper per ounce or whatever. So when you're looking at a house, you're looking at price per foot, price per square foot. And the price per square foot has gone up, but it has not gone up that much. I don't remember the exact figure because I can't remember what the episode was, and that's where all my research is. I've got a folder. It's got all this research in it. The price per square foot has not gone up. When you look at the cost of housing, how much that's gone up, price per square foot's gone up like 30% above inflation. That's bad. Went up above inflation. That's true. The houses are bigger than they used to be. The houses are better than, maybe you like old houses, whatever. They're better. They have more rooms in them. They're a lot bigger. They got taller ceilings, which if you're looking at square footage stuff, it's a lot of wasted space. But obviously we all like high ceilings in houses. They're nicer. There's a lot more regulations also in the newer houses, for like safety and like flame retardant building products and stuff like that. Those things, your older houses don't have those kinds of things. The actual homes have gotten a lot bigger than they used to be. And that has accounted for a lot of the increase in price of the houses. So keep that in mind. The price per square foot has not gone up as much as you think it has. I think it's somewhere between 20 and 30%. So keep that in mind. The other last thing that the federal government could stop doing, and then we'll go. Stop making it more expensive to buy products for the houses, to buy materials for the houses. We've got massive tariffs on all sorts of things that go into the building of these houses. Canadian lumber is a pretty big example. Okay, the tariff rates change so often. I don't know what today's tariff rate is, but it's like 35%, 45%, something like that. And people say, well, why don't they just use American lumber? It's not just that the Canadian lumber ends up being a little cheaper, which it can be cheaper because they got so much good wood up there. The actual lumber is better. The overall, just the climate up there in those massive forests creates like lighter, straighter, stronger wood for building homes than the climate in America does. The wood is not only a little bit cheaper, and so we get it from them, it's actually better wood for building houses. And so we have just decided to arbitrarily increase the price of all of that wood. And all of these houses are getting built with this wood. Then you got steel tariffs, you got aluminum tariffs, you got copper tariffs, all kinds of stuff. Copper goes in every single wire that's in your house, you know, your HVAC stuff, all sorts of things like that. Aluminum, you got your windows, all sorts of stuff like that. We put tariffs on all of that. And that's, of course, increased the price of the house. It's not like if you took away all the tariffs, the housing affordability crisis would just disappear. It's not a massive chunk, but from all the data I was trying to go through earlier, it's somewhere like 10% increased cost for the house. I mean, it's a big chunk. Financed over 30 years. It's a pretty big chunk of money. So we could look at doing that too. I tend to have an issue when we have yesterday we got a healthcare crisis. Why are we still taxing the hell out of healthcare providers and companies? Just stop. Stop trying to transfer money to people to be able to, like, first off, just stop making their business more expensive. Same thing when it goes for home builders. The best way to stimulate this supply, stop taxing these people. Let them do their job. If it's such a crisis and the affordability is such a crisis, why are you taking such a big percentage of the profit of the people who are building these homes? Allow them to actually decrease their prices and stop taxing them. Stop adding taxes on top of all the goods that are coming in to build the homes. They're artificially highly priced through tariffs and sales taxes and taxes on the businesses that are building the things, taxes paid by the people that are building the things, permits, zoning laws, all this stuff. And we keep trying to find ways to stimulate stuff here and stimulate stuff there. And at the end of the day, what it always comes down to is the government should just stop doing the things that it is doing to make all of these things more expensive. Then let's get to zero, to an equilibrium. Let's normalize. Let's figure out, without all the government interventions in the economy, what's our actual problem here? What's the real problem? And then we'll talk about it from that point. But right now we've got so many things, one piled on top of another, making things more expensive, stimulating demand over here, restricting supply over there. And then we look at the end of the day and we're like, oh my God, what happened? What's wrong with this? How do we fix this crisis? Stop doing the things you're doing to restrict the supply. All right. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me today. Really appreciate it. Hope you found a little bit of value in this. Leave me a comment on YouTube. Comment on our stuff on X. I don't really do anything on other social media platforms. That's the only other ways you're going to get a hold of me, unless you go to joingml.com and join the Fed Haters Club so you can hang out in the private Discord chat during the show. I think Charlie's going to be back here tomorrow. I don't know. I don't even know if he exists anymore. I'm not sure. There's really no way of knowing. If you enjoy what you just heard, tell a friend, tell a family member, leave a rating and a review. And if you do every single one of those things, and I mean every single one of them, then I'll be back here again tomorrow. Until then, have a good day and a good morning, Liberty.